Today, we're going to tackle a really provocative question. It was first asked more than 250 years ago by the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and honestly, it's as shocking today as it was back then. In an age that was all about progress, he stopped and asked, are we really sure that all our amazing art, our science, and all our knowledge have actually made us better people? Let's get into it. So, believe it or not, this whole thing started with an essay contest. Back in 1750, a big deal group called the Academy of Dijon in France put out a topic for their annual prize. And it was this exact question that launched Rousseau's entire career and basically put him in direct opposition to the biggest ideas of his time. And here it is, the question itself. Has the restoration of the sciences and the arts contributed to refining moral practices? In other words, has all this new learning and culture actually made us more moral? It seems like a simple question, right? And you'd think the answer would be pretty obvious, especially during the Enlightenment. Yeah, at the time, pretty much everyone agreed. The answer was a huge, resounding yes. Of course, progress in art and science leads to moral progress. The thinking was, as we get more educated and more sophisticated, we naturally become better, more virtuous people. It just seemed like common sense. But Rousseau, well, he decided to go in a completely different direction. He chose, and this is in his own words, to collide head-on with everything which wins men's admiration. He looked at all this so-called progress, and he didn't see improvement. He saw decay. So when the Academy asked if the arts and sciences have improved our morals, Rousseau's answer was a simple, direct, and absolutely earth-shattering no. This was like setting off a bomb in the middle of a fancy 18th century party. And this quote right here, this is his whole idea in a nutshell. For Rousseau, civilization is basically a beautiful trap. All our arts and sciences, they aren't setting us free, they're just decorations. They're like pretty garlands of flowers covering up the iron chains that tie us down, making us actually love our own slavery to society's rules. This really breaks down what Rousseau thought we traded away. He pictures this before time, when we were maybe a bit rough around the edges, sure, but we were also natural. We were honest with each other. And now we're all polished and artificial, stuck being polite but fake. We've swapped genuine trust for constant suspicion and real virtue for a corrupt performance. Now, this wasn't just some random feeling Rousseau had. He was convinced that history could actually prove his point. So he takes us on this tour of famous empires, looking for a pattern. And the pattern he saw was, well, pretty consistent. You look at Egypt becomes the cradle of philosophy, then gets conquered. Greece, as its arts got better and better, its morals fell apart, and it was soon taken over. And Rome, it started as a temple of virtue, he said, but turned into a theater of crime once it got obsessed with luxury and art. For Rousseau, it was clear. The peak of culture always came right before the collapse. But his absolute best example, the one that really drives the whole argument home, is the huge contrast between two of the most famous cities ever, Sparta and Athens. See, for Rousseau, Athens was the perfect example of beautiful corruption. It gave us breathtaking art and incredible philosophy, sure, but it was also a hotbed of vice. Sparta, on the other hand, was the total opposite. They literally kicked out the artists and scholars. They chose what Rousseau calls happy ignorance and a simple, virtuous life. So he forces us to ask, which is better, the gorgeous marble ruins left by Athens or the legacy of heroic deeds left by Sparta? And get this, Rousseau even uses Socrates, the wisest man in all of Athens, to prove his point. He reminds us that what made Socrates so wise wasn't that he knew a ton of stuff, like the poets and politicians claimed to. Nope. His wisdom was in knowing that he didn't know. For Rousseau, this was the ultimate praise of being honestly ignorant over being arrogantly knowledgeable. Okay, so if the arts and sciences are so bad for us, where on earth did they come from? Well, Rousseau argues they weren't born from our best intentions. He says they came from our darkest, most rotten impulses. Just think about that for a minute. Rousseau is saying our greatest intellectual achievements come from our worst character flaws. Astronomy? That came from superstition, from trying to tell the future. Eloquence, the art of public speaking, that's from ambition and wanting to control people. Geometry? Greed. Even the study of morality itself, he says, is just born from pride. It's a wild idea. If knowledge is born from vice, how could it ever lead to virtue? And for Rousseau, this all sets off a kind of chain reaction. It starts with knowledge coming from a bad place. That knowledge then encourages idleness, people sitting around thinking about useless things instead of doing their duty, and all that idle time creates a desire for luxury and comfort. And luxury, for Rousseau, that's the ultimate killer of virtue. It makes us soft, weakens our courage, and eventually the whole society just rots from the inside. So, if progress is a trap and knowledge is poison, what are we supposed to do? Well, that brings us to the last and maybe the most radical part of his argument, his praise for just being simple, even ignorant. What an image, right? Rousseau is suggesting that our natural state of not knowing things is actually a gift. He says, nature is like a loving mom trying to keep the dangerous weapon of knowledge away from us to protect us. The fact that learning is hard isn't a bug, it's a feature.
And this is the bottom line. The real goal in life isn't to be the smartest person in the room or a famous artist. The goal is just to be a good person. We should stop caring if someone is talented and start asking if they have integrity. We should stop worrying if a book is well written and start asking if it's actually useful.
And this is where he leaves us. Real wisdom, real philosophy isn't something you find in a giant library. He calls it virtue, the sublime science of simple souls. And how do you learn it? Not by reading, but by looking inside yourself and just listening to your conscience. It's a kind of knowledge that anyone can access, not just the highly educated. So we end right back where we started with a big question. Rousseau's ideas were uncomfortable then, and they're maybe even more relevant now. In our world of non-stop tech progress, of social media and AI, what have we actually gained? And what have we lost?